Hello, and welcome to our discussion on visual aids. In this video, we're going to talk about the three types of visual aids, how to create a visual outline for your presentation, some basics when using visual aids in a speech, and utilizing charts, graphs, and images effectively. So let's start off by discussing why visual aids are important. Well, for one thing, they make content easier to understand and remember. You can oftentimes present information in a visual format that people can comprehend much faster, much more readily than if they just heard you say it or if they were reading that information. So visual aids help with that aspect. They can also help you emphasize what are the key components of a speech or any kind of message. At the end of the day, audiences aren't going to remember everything you said, so you want them to remember the most important things, and that's what visual aids can help you do. And then also, visual aids can aid your delivery. So when I teach public speaking classes, for lack of a better phrase, I will often say that everything in a speech can be used to cheat. And what I mean by that is make you look smoother in your presentation than maybe you naturally intuitively are. So that's everything from how you prepare for a speech, how you use your note cards, how you outline a presentation, aspects of your delivery, such as using visual aids. All of this can be used, even how you interact with your audience, quite frankly. All of this can be used in a way to help your delivery be smoother. And we're going to discuss some ways visual aids can do that as well. So these are all the reasons why you want to incorporate visual aids wherever you can. So let's talk about the three types of visual aids. So visual aids basically fall into the categories of either filler, explanatory, or supplemental. So let's talk about filler visual aids. A filler visual aid is basically something that is related to your topic, but it doesn't actually provide any content or information. So an example would be if I pull up a college's website, okay, any college, and if I were to ask you, what are the typical images you would think you would see on that website? You would see things like students, like there's always that stock image, or sometimes it's real actual students there, but it's the five students walking in the grass together, right? Kumbaya, essentially. One of them's laughing, right? They're carrying their backpacks and coffee. If they have a cool building, you're going to see the clock tower, right? The grassy field or something with students like, it looks like it's in late fall or summer and they're just all out there, studying in blankets or just like chilling, hanging out, right? They're going to show you the library shot with the students studying, maybe overhead, or you just see them staring intently into their laptops as they are looking at books on the shelf or something like that. They're going to show you the coolest classroom, whatever that may be. So basically, they're going to show you kind of two versions of the classroom. They're going to show you the one with the best technology, right? Then they're also going to show you the most intimate setting. So like think of the classroom that's only got 10 seats, or maybe they're all in a circle, instructors in the middle, right? It just looks like you're having this really intimate, deep conversation. These are all the things you're going to see. So those are filler visual aids for this respect. Now let's think about this. Do those visual aids tell you anything about that college? No, they tell you nothing, right? Especially if it's like if the images of students are stock images, right? Those aren't even students that go there. Do they tell you the programs the school offers, cost of tuition, graduation rate, job placement rate? They tell you none of these things, right? So they're just filler. They're related to the topic, they are images of the school, of the college, but they don't actually give you any content. Now, why these distinctions matter, I'm going to come back to that, but that's what filler visual aids are. Explanatory visual aids actually explain whatever it is you're talking about. So, sticking with this college example, if you guys were prospective students thinking of going to this college or university, and I was giving an admissions presentation telling you this is why you should come here and be a part of our nursing program, for example, and I was talking about how the college has agreements with local hospitals or healthcare facilities for you to do basically internships and externships there. So nursing schools will often have as a requirement of graduation that you complete what are called clinicals, which are basically internships and externships. And sometimes colleges will have agreements with, say, local hospital A, B, and C for you to work there. So let's say I'm talking about that. And as I'm talking about that, instead of the stock image of the cool classroom or just the cool clock tower, in the fall with leaves falling, I have an image of the hospital that we have a clinical agreement with. That is explanatory. It explains what I'm talking about. Supplemental would be a visual aid that also is an example of what you're talking about, but it might not literally be what you're talking about. It's just an extra example. So it'd be like if I'm talking about A, and then I show you B and I show you C. So I show you one more example, right? So it's not filler, it's real content, but it's just an added example. And again, the importance for these distinctions are going to be clear when we come back to them in a few minutes. A couple of other basics about visual aids you should keep in mind. They should be easy to see and understand. So visual aids should always just enhance a presentation. They're not driving the bus, okay? You want an audience to be focused on you and not your visual aids. So they should not be reading the visual aids like paragraphs of information, just like you shouldn't be reading directly off the visual aids. They should just be enhancing whatever it is you are talking about. And if you do have handouts, a business card, something like that, always save that for the end of the presentation unless there's some reason like you're going to be going over something in there that they really do need to be looking at during the presentation. And even then, you should give them to them at that moment. Try to time it as best you can. Now, what's the reason for that? It's because if you start to hand out that stuff early on, they might be looking at that instead of paying attention to you. Okay. Ultimately, in the real world, you will oftentimes at the end of a presentation be giving them a project plan or a business proposal or something, right? Because oftentimes, you may get your opportunity to give your 10 minutes pitch to somebody, but they're going to check out what you said afterwards, right? They might not just take your word for it. They're going to look up what you said because it involves their money, right? And they care about their money. And so you would give that stuff to them at the end. And another sort of important part about this, like saving that stuff for the end and keeping visual aids simple, is that these kind of link up in this respect. If you do have really complicated information related to a topic that you do think is important to give your audience, and including really complicated charts and graphs, oftentimes that can be in the handout you give them at the end, right? To sort of look at after the presentation or as a follow up later. Those types of things you don't necessarily want to mix in during the real time speech because it'll take away too much from the speech to have to, if you've got to stop and spend 2-3 minutes explaining that stuff to them, right? So you don't want to do that. You want to save that, for the end. So let me give you an example of this sort of explanatory supplemental sort of filler thing, and then we will talk about sort of how to do a sort of what's called a visual outline. Well, so let me kind of show you an example of that here. Okay, so we have a student. Now this is a class where this student was giving a presentation on Starbucks. Okay, so they're giving a presentation on Starbucks. And this was a class for drafting and design students, and these students were essentially, when I was teaching this class, it was a public speaking class, but it was kind of geared towards giving investment pitches where like students were randomly assigned a business and they were supposed to basically give a hypothetical speech in a scenario where you're trying to convince somebody who has a piece of land that they should use it to invest in to develop it for this purposes for whatever business they were assigned. Or they were given another hypothetical scenario where it was just, hey, somebody has money, they're thinking of opening a given chain, should they do it, right? And you were just assigned trying to convince them of that. So in this case, this person was assigned trying to convince you, if you had the land or you had the property, that you should use that to invest and open a chain, a Starbucks location, right? So Starbucks very prominent on the West Coast primarily. East Coast tends to be more like Dunkin' Donuts and some other chains, but Starbucks is big on the West Coast. So one of their main points in this speech was that Starbucks varies the menu by season. Okay, so Starbucks varies the menu by season. And they start to talk about how, first of all, and the reason they do this is because you can make more money, right? If you start to match your menu to the applicable season. So what happens is people tend to purchase more cold and healthy beverages in the summer and hot and sugary drinks in the winter. And there's different reasons for that. One of the sort of basic intuitive beliefs is that in the summer people are kind of health conscious. They're out and about, and they're a little more like appearance conscious, right? And so they're trying to like eat and drink things that are healthy for them. And so you can push those products, right? You'll basically make more sales if you push those in the summer. And in the winter, they tend to go for more of these sugary things. And again, the intuitive sort of belief there is that, hey, we're under a lot of stress in the winter. The weather's kind of gloomy. You might have some seasonal affect going on where people are just kind of down, right, in the doldrums because the weather's bad and it gets dark early and all this sorts of stuff. And like I said, you're under a lot of pressure, so they just kind of like tend to buy more sugary and unhealthy things at that time. So they're talking about that and saying, hey, if you vary the menu, you're going to make more money. And they also specifically were talking about how in the summer you could sell what are called these Evolution Fresh items. So these are basically smoothie drinks, okay? And so see, so let's say while they're giving that speech, they show you this image. So this image that you see here, these are some of those smoothie drinks. This is an explanatory visual aid. Now, filler would be if you just had the random Starbucks logo, right? If I just showed you a visual aid of happy people smiling and sitting at a Starbucks, or just a general coffee shop, right? That's filler. It's not telling you anything about what they're talking about menu items in the season, right? It's just, but it's related, but it's not adding content. This is actually literally what they're talking about. This is explanatory, okay? So we have what? We've got organic green devotion, cold pressed orange. I don't know if they still sell these. So let's say they're talking about this. So this is explanatory, okay? Now, while they are talking about this student then they're going through maybe one or two of these drinks and say, hey, look, you can mark these up. You'll make about a 300% return on your investment, right? These sell through fast during the summer. They're talking about all the potential profit here, and while they're talking about that, they bring up this slide. So this is a supplemental visual aid. So they're actually not going to talk about this slide, right? Beyond maybe saying, and hey, obviously in the winter you can sell other things too. And maybe this is up there for like 10 seconds and then they quickly kind of move on. Or even while they're still talking about it, finishing their discussion on the smoothies. So why are they not going to talk about a peppermint mocha, a gingerbread latte? Because it's pretty self-explanatory that this is what you can sell in the winter, right? Like I'm assuming that the audience looks up and they see the words Christmas and gingerbread. They probably know these are the items that you can sell in the winter, right? So it's self-explanatory. So this is supplemental. It's adding an extra example. Now, you might have seen this, unless you're going through kind of like this is a very high level technique with visual aids. When you start throwing in supplemental things, extra examples, you don't even necessarily really talk about them or you mention them really briefly in passing. Why would you even do that, right? Is kind of like the question. Well, look at it this way. So in a real presentation situation, people are going to hear from more than just you, right? In a classroom setting, you hear 20 speeches on 20 different topics, and the audience is there because they're in the class. They have no other reason to care or be invested in the topic. Okay? In a real setting, it's not like that. A classroom is lab, it's artificial. In a real setting, the same person or group of people is going to hear from 3 or 4 people at least on the same topic, right? So you're going to give a speech about opening a Starbucks. They're going to hear somebody else come in and talk about opening a Starbucks, okay? If that was realistically what they were considering doing, or a coffee chain or a chain, right? And what this allows you to do is throw in extra content with your 10 minutes. Like you get 10 minutes, your competitor gets 10 minutes. Can you use it more wisely than them? Right? And this is how you can. So you can throw in extra examples, give them more content, right? This is me giving you the winter example. And if my competitor, if that guy or girl is just showing you a random Starbucks logo, who do you think's winning here? Right? It's me. I'm giving you more content. And this is part of how like people will leave. They'll talk to 2 people about something, right? Or see a presentation on something, and they'll just have this feeling. They'd be like, I don't know, man. Just my gut feeling. I just feel like this person knew their stuff more than the other person. You know what? Sometimes it's not your gut feeling. Like, by the way, in life, sometimes you have a gut feeling for a reason. It's actually a logical, rational. There's a reason you're feeling that way. In this case, you feel like they just knew their stuff better because they literally showed you more stuff. They gave you more examples. They used the time better, right? So this is a way to throw extra stuff in. One of the ways you would have, I don't know, maybe seen this would be, as far as like high level sales presentation stuff, it'd be like every year when Apple does here's the new iPhone and here's the new Apple Watch, right? The person will be up there and they're talking about how, the Apple Watch can do this. And they're talking about how it's water resistant to so many feet, and they're maybe showing you an image of a diver and somebody like timing themselves, like some competitive swimmer, or they're doing things about the Apple Watch and water resistance. And so when they show that visual aid, that's explanatory, right? And while they're doing that, all of a sudden in the back of the screen, where they're still talking about water resistance and how this is the most advanced technology that any Apple Watch has ever had, you then see in the background somebody doing like sleep tracking metrics. Excuse me, with the Apple Watch. That's supplemental. It's an extra example, right? So they're going to throw three or four things just moving in that giant screen behind them while they're talking, right? And so it's a way to throw in extra stuff. So you'll see that, or it'd be like if Sony, they're releasing a new gaming console, a new PlayStation, and they're saying, hey, the new PlayStation 6 or 7 or whatever console we're talking about, it can do things A and B, and in the background they'll show you A and B, but they'll also show you C and D. So it's a way to throw in extra stuff. And filler would again just be maybe the PlayStation logo, or just the Apple logo, or a generic person drinking coffee and looking at their Apple Watch to see what time it is, right? That's what filler would be. So these are the three types of visual aids. Now, there's a couple things that this should cue into you. So one is it allows you to add extra content, extra information, but there's something else that you can do with this, okay, that essentially matters. And that is help your delivery. So I said everything can be used to cheat to help you come across smoother, okay? So how is that true in this case? So the first thing first way that works in this case is, let's go back to that student example where I was talking to your potential college students, and you're thinking of going here to join, like, let's say I'm teaching at a college that has a nursing program, okay? And I'm talking about clinical sites, and I'm like, hey, if you come here, you can be involved in our clinical sites. And this is where we have agreements, so hey, great opportunity, right? And let's say while I'm talking, I lose my place. So I just totally forget where I was, I space out. I mean, that's one of the common fears that people have with public speaking. Well, I've got a couple things that can help me, right? Well, my brain has failed me, right? If I really don't know where I was, it's kind of hard for the audience to help me here. They don't know where I was going either, right? What are the two things I have left? Okay, I have left my note cards, or I can try to look at the visual aid. That's what I got. Okay. Now you can look down at your note cards, but you know what's faster is to look back at your visual aids. Okay. Now, if I quickly glance at my visual aids, and I'm actually going to explain in a second why that's faster, but if I glance back at my visual aids, and all I look back at my visual aids and I just see is the random cool classroom, the library shot, the students walking happily in the grass, like on the sidewalk talking, is that going to help me remember I was talking about clinical sites? No, right? It's not going to help me at all. The cool clock tower that the college has, the grassy field, is not going to help. But if I look back, and instead of a filler visual aid, I have an explanatory visual aid. I have an image of the hospital we do clinical sites we have clinical agreements with. That's going to help me. Oh yeah, I was talking about clinical sites because there's an image of the hospital that we do clinicals, that our students do clinicals at, right? So it's basically a note card for you if it's explanatory. It can't be a note card if it's filler. It can also be a note card if it's supplemental, quite frankly. If I was giving this Starbucks speech and I look back and I see the word Christmas and I see gingerbread, right? Um, Hopefully that clues you in that you're like, oh yeah, these are things that you can buy during Christmas because I see the word during the different season change, right? Because I see the word Christmas. So filler visual aids just don't help you. That's the other problem with them is they don't help the audience. They don't give the audience any real content or information. But the bigger kind of thing is like it does not help your delivery. It doesn't help you cheat. It doesn't help you look smoother, right? If you get in trouble, you want to be able to look back at that visual aid, have a quick cue. Where was I? And if you have explanatory or supplemental, it'll quickly get you back on track. And this goes to a point that I wanted to get to here about creating a visual outline. So when you create a visual outline, right, with a presentation, once you now kind of know what all three of these visual aids are, here's what you basically do to help yourself cheat, so to speak. Now, first of all, to do this, you got to do your visual aids last. So you're preparing a presentation and you get bored. So you just get on Google Images and start looking up random images related to the topic. Can't be playing that game. Okay, because then you're just gonna end up with filler because it's not you're not actually trying to tie it to any content, right? And again, that's not gonna help you. So what you do is once you know all your intro, your main points, all these, where you're going with all this, right? Then you create a visual aid for your intro and your conclusion. So essentially a cover slide, and then maybe some type of presentation preview and a review slide and some sort of concluding slide. Then you create a visual aid for each main point, and especially for the ones with each main point, your first main point, your second main point, your third main point, you specifically find a visual aid, and maybe if you're doing bullets in a PowerPoint, which we're going to get to in a few minutes, you figure out what you're going to say just in a short sentence or a keyword that is explanatory, right? So I'm talking about clinical sites. Let me find an image of where we do clinicals and internships, externships, right? Second main point, I'm talking about whatever it is. I'm graduate job placement rate or cost. Let's say I'm talking about cost of tuition. Then I'm going to create a visual aid with a graph talking about cost of tuition, right? Not the stock image of the library, and so on. So you create an explanatory visual aid for your three main points. Then if you need more, so that's 5 visual aids to 6 if you think about it, right? You've got your something for your opener, something for your conclusion, one for each main point. Then if you need more, you go to your subpoints, right? So your first main point. So in this case, the Starbucks speech, this person was talking about how you vary the menu by season. Here's what you sell in the summer. Here's what you sell in the winter. Okay, great. Create a slide for the summer, slide for the winter, just like he did in that presentation. And you can go to your second main point, create explanatory. Now, what this allows you to do is basically create a visual outline, which really turns into just note cards, right? So what I'm really telling you what to do here is what I'm explaining to you is how you can give a speech with no note cards, and it looks like or that you have no note cards, but you really do, right? It looks like you're just doing this without anything, and they're right there. There's a phrase of delivery, which is good delivery is delivery not noticed, right? And essentially, these note cards are just hiding in plain sight. They're right there on the visual aids, right? You can easily look back if you need them. And another advantage about this is because they're explanatory, because they're related to what you're talking about, they help emphasize the content for your audience, right? And so that's basically what you're doing. And now if I ever get lost, I look back and my visual aids are there to help me. So that's what you're doing with creating a visual outline. You're essentially creating the visual aids as note cards. Now look, this is in principle what you're doing. And this is the real effect you're going for to help your delivery and to help your audience know like what's really important to remember here. And if you're being supplemental to like throw in some extra information. But I want to make a couple of things clear here. So that are like subtle points you need to also remember. Excuse me. Now, first of all, this does not mean put up there paragraph after paragraph of information that you just read, right? So in other words, I'm not saying literally make the visual aids note cards. What I'm saying is they should be usable for you as a note card to get you back on track if you lose your place. And they will be if you use explanatory visual aids, right? But if you just have to turn back and just read the whole PowerPoint, you're not really giving a speech anymore. At that point, you're just reading, and you're going to lose your audience. And plus, if they have to read the whole PowerPoint, they're not going to be able to pay attention to you anymore, right? So you're going to lose them. So you don't want to do that. Now, look, there are some exceptions to that. You're sitting in your chemistry class, and your, I don't know, advanced calculus, your biology class, like your instructor is going to sit here, all this hard stuff, all this hard sciencey stuff. Your instructor is going to sit here and they're going to have maybe some more like texts of information, right? Because that's a situation where the audience doesn't know a lot about the topic, and you're not only like giving a speech about it, you're kind of like you're educating, you're like informing them on the topic, like really hardcore, like teaching them about it. So if it's a complicated topic that you have to teach your audience about, sometimes in like classroom settings, you will see more information like that on a visual aid. But in real world speeches, it's not like that. Now, why is it not like that? Because typically your audience already knows something about the topic, right? They know some of the basics. There's a reason they're listening to that presentation because they're already interested in it, right? And so they're going to have a base foundation of knowledge to where you don't need to have paragraph after paragraph. So I'm not saying literally create a note card you read. What I'm saying is you create something that can be used as a note card, again, in principle. Now, second extra sort of detailed point here is I made the comment that you create an explanatory or supplemental visual aid for your first main point, an explanatory or supplemental visual aid for your second main point, an explanatory or supplemental visual aid for your third main point. You notice I did not say intro or conclusion. Now, you can certainly have an explanatory visual aid or intro in your conclusion, but it's harder to do that. Now, especially for the intro, because you haven't gotten into the speech yet. So all of a sudden showing you a clinical site right off the bat, it's a little like, what are you showing me, right? Because I don't even know your topic. Like, I don't even know where this is going yet, right? So usually in an intro or conclusion, that's actually one of the spots that people will use filler. So like in this hypothetical speech to potential college students here, maybe that's when I do have the library or the college logo in the background or something, or a generic shot of the campus. Because you're just sort of getting into the topic, right? You're sort of introducing it. The other reason that so you don't want to have something that like requires a lot of the audience's sort of intellectual sort of like interpretation or like really heavy, like you don't want something they have to think about a lot right away because they don't even know, they haven't heard much of the speech, so they don't even know what to think about yet. So don't challenge them right away with something that they have to like really spend a lot of energy digesting in an intro. The other reason that you can use a filler visual aid in the intro, quite frankly, is, if you're using this as potential helpful note cards, you are least likely to need one in the intro. You've probably practiced the intro a lot. You've probably practiced the intro the most, which you should do, because research on like speech anxiety shows that there's usually a spike in anxiety in the first like 30, 60 seconds. So if you can just start the situation off well, usually the rest of it goes a lot smoother. Whether it's I said situation because that's whether it's a speech or any other thing, right? And so when you have anxiety, it tends to go down if you just start it well, right? So you do want to practice the intro a lot so you can get off to a good start, because then your anxiety will go down. So if you practice the intro a lot, you're less likely to screw up in the intro. If you are less likely to screw up in the intro, you can probably get away with a filler visual aid. And again, I think a filler visual aid just works in the intro because it's something kind of simple, kind of gets the audience comfortable with the speech and the topic as they're settling in. I think that's probably even better anyway than an actual example of one of the things you're going to talk about right away. Another place you can use fillers sometimes is the conclusion, because they kind of, okay, the audience knows the main points, right? And so you can maybe kind of end with a basic filler right at that point. And you've gotten through the speech now and you kind of know the main points. Finally, a third place to use fillers would be as transitions. So think of like, it used to be like some old school presentations where if somebody was using like poster board essentially, where they would like have a blank board that they would put in place until before you looked at the next slide or something, the next poster board or something like that. So essentially you can use these as like delayed transitions. So let's say I don't want to show you the next slide, or I don't want you looking at that yet or focusing on that yet. Sometimes you can then put a filler visual aid in there as a placeholder, right, until you get to the next thing. Okay. And so that's another way to use filler visual aids. Finally, you can also use filler visual aids so an image can be filler so long as the rest of the content is actually explanatory or supplemental. So go back to this slide I showed you earlier. This image is actually filler. This is a random speech of just about something, who knows. Is whatever that speech is about, is that really related to the topic? No. I mean, you could maybe say it's explanatory because it is a visual aid, and we're talking about visual aids, but it's pretty generic to this topic, right? It doesn't matter for our purposes what his speech is about, or even what type of visual aid he has up there. It's just an image of somebody with visuals, okay? So why am I showing you that, right? Well, so it adds some flavor to the slides if you throw in some images. That it's just more aesthetically pleasing than if you just had text there. So you can have a filler image. So this is a relatively filler image, so long as the text is explanatory. In this case, the text is. So I'm talking about how you have these three types of visual aids, right? Explanatory, supplemental, and filler, right? If I lose my place, I can read that one sentence and see where I was, and the next three bullets, right? So the text is explanatory. So you can get away with filler as long as the text is explanatory. So either one works. But that's some things to keep in mind about the three types of visual aids. And again, if you do this well, they essentially become potential note cards if need be. And by the way, so I mentioned really early on in this video where I had said that it's easier. So you lose your place, right? Your brain's failed you. The audience can't really help you. So you have your note cards or your visual aids at this point. right? Your preparation has failed you, right? So you have your note cards and your visual aids. Which one would be easier to rely on? So you can look back down in your visual aids at your note cards, right, and figure out where you were. That is true, right? That's not like not a thing. Um, but it was actually faster to look at your visual aids, and I'm going to show you an example of that. So let's go to this slide here, where what I'm going to show you, let's find it, this piece of information. So let's say I put this slide in front of you, and I had a stopwatch, and I was just going to time. So there's two things going on with these numbers, and I said, what is the two relationships? What's happening with the numbers, right? And just tell me what's happening. Now, you guys would eventually figure it out. It might take you a minute, might take you 2 minutes, right? Maybe longer, but you'll figure it out, right? Now, let's say I did the same thing. I was just timing you, and I said, there's two things that I want you to pull out from these numbers. Tell me what the two things are. Same information. Now, you're going to get this a lot faster, right? If you see this, and I'm timing you, it's going to be faster for you to quickly say, okay, essentially all of the months were basically the same. So you see it's the same relationship there between red and blue there, essentially, except for like red slightly higher every month by about the same, by about 10, except for in March, something crazy happened, clearly, right? Now, look, I've labeled this one. I've given you some context, like it's two competing companies. But even if I didn't give you the context, I just had a stopwatch and I said, tell me what's going on here versus tell me what's going on here, this is going to be faster. Now, what's the point? What does that tell you? That tells you that if you lose your place and you need to figure it out, hopefully as quickly as possible, so the audience, it's less awkward, or the audience maybe doesn't even catch that you lost your place, it's easier to do it through a visual aid, right? It's easier to look and see something visual, quickly comprehend the information and move forward than it is to read it, aka look at your note card because you're reading, right? So this is faster. Using your visual aids is always faster. So that's another reason why you want to use these as a visual outline. Okay, a couple of other basics to sort of keep in mind. Use a maximum of 4 to 5 points per slide and 2 slides per minute. Don't go faster than that. Try to avoid paragraphs, use sentences or keywords. This is basically just trying to avoid information overload. So what information overload is, basically if you just have too much information, the audience can just tune it out, right? It just kind of get overwhelmed. Or the secondary problem is sometimes the audience can lose track of like what was the most important thing, right? What were the main points? What were through all of this? What were the key takeaways, right? And it just kind of gets lost, right? And so you got to make sure that they can see the forest for the trees and not overload them with information. So use three, like maybe it's a lot of slides are like this where there's only 3 bullet points, but like 3-4 bullet points, keywords, complete sentences. Avoid these like long paragraphs. Use consistent fonts, color schemes, and animations. What I mean by that is there's lots of research that shows if you use too many fonts, too many color schemes, too many animations, you basically create a situation where it's just not aesthetically pleasing to the audience. They don't like it and they kind of tune it out. There's even research with e-commerce that shows with websites, like people, they're just less likely to stay on a site, purchase something, click on links if you're just going crazy with the animations and the fonts and the color schemes. So keep it simple, right? Keep it to 2, 3 color, depending on what we're talking about. Like, don't get too crazy. Another sort of like just real world thing to keep in mind, it's not required, but just good life advice is, okay, I realize most people use the cloud, so you save it online, but you should probably consider saving things to a flash drive. Have like some sort of copy saved on a flash drive, some sort of physical medium, and then have a backup printed out. In a real world, you can't just say, well, I'm not doing the presentation because, the Wi-Fi's down, right? That's just not happening. So you still got to go. So you want to be prepared for all contingencies. You need to be able to do something even if the internet's down, etc. So just good life advice there. Okay, charts, graphs, and images. So obviously people tend to use a lot of these, and I mentioned earlier before, you want to make sure that you label them and that they're kind of easy to see and understand. So that was the problem with this first one. is, this, if you think about it, all people have to do here is like read numbers, right, in a table. So this is not a very visual aid. You're just kind of reading, right? So here you see they've created an actual graph and they've labeled it. They've told you for context, right, that these are two competing companies within the first quarter of the year 2017, right? And again, not only just sort of labeling it so we understand what it is. That was the problem with that first one, is not only you just sort of reading it, but nobody even kind of knows what that is, what it's referring to. In this case, beyond that, you've created a situation where they know what it is, but also it's because it's in an actual chart versus just numbers in a table. It's an actual visual aid. When you use charts and graphs, think of like pie graphs and things like that. These types of charts, it's so much easier to understand things when you see them visual like this. So always good if you can incorporate these. It's just easier than just putting the raw numbers up there. Again, make sure you title and label variables, and also quickly summarize these. These need to be things that within 20, 30 seconds you can quickly kind of run through. They can't be super complicated. If they're too complicated, you just want to add those to your project plan or your business proposal, right? They don't necessarily like, or some sort of a handout that you're going to give them in the end. That's not something that needs to necessarily be in the presentation. Now, it depends. Obviously, you might have to make some exceptions to that, depending on the topic, depending on what specific piece of information this chart or graph is covering, right? It might be something that maybe you got to focus a little bit more on, but otherwise, if it's super complicated, consider it as a handout or something you're going to give them at the end. Okay, so I want to show you an example of a visual aid. So let's look at a good one. And so you can kind of see all these moving parts in action where somebody is using mostly explanatory and visual aids, supplemental, filler, all that sort of stuff. So this is a speech where somebody was talking about, this was a career goals presentation. So essentially, they were giving a speech on their ideal job or career. So we have a cover slide here. This is just to sort of like set the tone as they begin their introduction. Okay, that's fine. And then they immediately go into a preview. So these are their three main points. Now, if they do screw up right away on their intro, this is going to help. They can easily look back at this and see, okay, this is what I was going to talk about. And again, this emphasizes to the audience what are the main takeaways here. So they're going to talk about, in this case, they did want to be an attorney. So they're going to talk about why they want to be an attorney. 2 keys to being successful, and then finally, how to obtain that job. So those are their 3 key main points. Now, again, these images here, these are just kind of like little filler graphics, like, right, little filler artwork. That's fine because the content here is explanatory. All right, why do I want to be an attorney? So their interest in their skills, their opportunity to help people, and financial rewards. So what's going on here? Again, stock image, that's filler image of just some random dude apparently practicing law with a gavel. A gavel by their side. I don't know. All these attorney websites have always got to have the gavel. So that's a filler image. Now, can you get away with that? Yes, you can, because again, if you look at their bullets here, which are just keywords, right? That's great. Not a lot of text. The keywords are explanatory and supplemental. So in this case, what their 2 main things that they were going to talk about are that it actually interests them being a lawyer practicing law, and they believe they have skill sets that tie to this well. Okay. So they're going to talk about that, and they're also going to talk about how it gives them an opportunity to help people. So those were their 2 kind of like subpoints, their A and B, so to speak, of this main point. The financial rewards is not really something they spent really any time at all. They just sort of mentioned in passing, and of course, there's other benefits, as I think, if I remember correctly, what this person said. So that's an example of supplemental. They're just throwing in another example of like, why would you maybe want to do this? Is it potentially can be financially lucrative, right? So that's explanatory. Again, they lose their place. Easy for them to figure out where they were. Then they talk about 2 keys to being successful. In this case, it's organization skills. You have to be reliable and knowledgeable within your field of practice. And so again, that's all explanatory and or supplemental. It helps them. They've got this filler image key here, but this also kind of like, actually I would say this little clip art image is not actually filler because they're talking about keys and it's just proverbial key, right? To help the audience emphasize that these are like key factors. So kind of a good use of an image there. slash potentially filler, right? But obviously, this being explanatory is what matters, or supplemental. And then finally, how to obtain the job. So again, these are the two or three things they're going to talk about. I think one of these, I think obtain a job. They didn't really talk about that because it's pretty self-explanatory. You would get a job if you want this job, but they focus mostly on complete a bachelor's or law degree, pass the bar exam, right? So this is explanatory slash supplemental. The images are kind of filler-ish, but that's fine. So, and you can see here how clean this is. There's not many slides here. There's not a lot of text, but yet there's enough here where this person is going to be able, if they lose their place, to very quickly get right back on track, right? Very quickly see where they were. And then we get to the last slide. They have a review slide. And where, again, here, this person wanted to, I mean, again, this is a student example. So are there ways you could have improved this? Sure. Uh, like you could have added, I think, some more images in general, right? Real world kind of images of some things related to each one. Or maybe you could have even threw in some filler images in between if you wanted, as long as you were able to sort of use it in the right way to where you were always able to get to the main points you were talking about and have those as potential note cards for you. But in their review slide here, so again, this is where you could have added maybe an image. They talk about, they review the main points, which were why they want to go into the field, 2 keys to be successful, and how to obtain the job. I see here they actually have a typo. They, for some reason, put accounting, and they were talking about being a lawyer. And then they tell people where to go for more information, right? So again, very clean, very simple. So when you do your visual aids, always do them last. And then once you know all your content, create that visual aid for your intro, like a cover slide, some type of preview. That's like 1 to 2 visual aids. Do one for your review, and then do one for each main point. Build the visual aids for each main point as explanatory primarily or supplemental. And then you sprinkle in the filler visual aids either as transitions, right, between the main points, or maybe in your intro, maybe in your conclusion. And that's how you create visual aids that not only are easy for your audience to then remember what you're talking about and understand what are the main points, but can be, some sort of note cards for you in case you lose, excuse me, in case you lose your place. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.